Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I am delighted to be joined by a friend and colleague in the space, Chris Motley, who is the founder and CEO of an amazing community-driven technology platform called Mentor Spaces that we're going to be talking about today. Chris, thanks so much for carving out the time in the busy day-to-day life of an entrepreneur.
Anything for you, Julia. Thanks a lot for having me on.
So I want to dive in. Obviously, we're going to link to your website, but I would love to just have you voice over what prompted you to start Mentor Spaces and kind of what problem you were setting out to solve, and maybe what problem you are now solving, because I know that sometimes shifts for an entrepreneur. But what was the impetus behind starting the platform?
Yeah, well, I would say that the core impetus is just growing up in a family and growing up in the church and having this responsibility to the community and to, your people. I think that always was something in my DNA. And once I navigated in a very manual and serendipitous way to a career at Goldman Sachs and made a little bit of money that allowed me to sort of scratch the entrepreneurial itch, my big focus was saying, okay, how do I help advance the careers of other people? And the first iteration of that in a non-technology company, was actually manufacturing, was creating jobs through textile manufacturing. That was mostly centered in West Africa and exporting goods to the US. And when I saw the power of just building an organization that's very focused on employment, I then started to think about ways to apply technology in a way that can be scaled more easily and sort of create serendipity for other people. So the initial problems to solve was really reducing friction. And that's one of those like really obvious things you can see. And as you go through the journey of being an entrepreneur and you dig deeper, you realize that surface level problem it's a symptom of something else. We realized in our work that, especially among underrepresented minorities, that a key problem was one of a lack of confidence and a lack of social capital. And if we can build a solution that can help build confidence, build social capital, close these network gaps that exist, we can have a pretty successful company. And Mentor Spaces was the conclusion of that in terms of mentorship as a practice accomplishes both of those goals.
Awesome. So I think, there's a bevy, I would say, of solutions in this space, selling some sort of mentoring solution. But can you actually, let's dig one layer deeper and give me a sense of, as a learner, a prospective employee, or a current employee and worker, how would I experience the platform? Sort of what's the user experience that you've set out to build?
Yeah, and I think there's a few. You're exactly right. I think there's a bevy of approaches. I wouldn't say
solutions. Touché.
but I think it's important to set context first. And so, number one, what is mentorship? And because it really helps to inform how you design a solution or design an approach. And for us, we've defined mentorship as simply a conversation with someone in the know. Or to say it differently, a conversation with someone who can help you accomplish your goals. And when you are able to sort of distill it down to its single unit of measure, it makes it very clear on how you might design a user experience. And so for us, it's saying, hey, let's collect an inventory of people's expertise, their time commitment, their availability, and let's match that inventory of experts' time to people who would be better served having a conversation with them. And it doesn't have to be limited to our traditional sense of mentorship, like a one-on-one, 6 times we meet over a 6-month period. It can also happen in a group format because there are certain needs that are fairly homogenous and can be accomplished with greater efficacy and scale by organizing it around groups as well. So the user experience is simply that a learner or an adult can come in, they clarify their goal. There's multiple ways to do this and throughout the user experience. They clarify their career interest and they give us a little bit of biographical information that really helps to facilitate the matching process through Affinity. And that's where we start when you connect sort of the folks with the shared experience to learn, to share with those who are willing to learn.
Got it. And just to get one layer more concrete, is this, if I'm a prospective employee, am I looking at a particular company and having a conversation with someone at that company, or is it not that kind of linear? Is it a broader ecosystem?
It's broader, but it can get that specific. I mean,
Okay.
if you are interested in financial services, the set of mentors who we would recommend to you would be people who've already raised their hand, people who've already said, I'm willing to commit my time and here's my availability. And they would be in financial services. As goals get more precise, which is a function of your own awareness, you say, oh, I'm interested in financial services, but I really want to be a commodities trader, which is my first career. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind. Well, then that requires a different person.
Yeah.
And so having a flexible user experience that meets people where they are, that allows you to go deeper, just like we're doing this conversation, is exactly the point. We want to make sure that, we recognize and keep remembering that if we're solving this problem of confidence, you don't want to remind people of the fact that they don't have confidence.
Yeah.
Because the easiest thing to do is just not use the application. And so we're very sensitive about those things so that we can meet people where they are and they can sort of pick up and engage very quickly.
And in terms of your target demographic of user, who are you focusing on, or who are you maybe looking to focus on in the future?
Yeah, so we explicitly focus on the Black and Latinx population between the ages of 18 and about 38. And it really points
39-year-olds are screwed. No, I'm kidding. Over the hill.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that, and it's actually a really good question because we get data reports on this,
sure,
and it comes back like segmented, and it stops at 38. And I'm like, okay, so it's in my like talking points. That's funny. We'll span to 40. We'll span to 40.
Got it. Okay, super helpful. So you kind of alluded to this already, but I want to pause on this word mentorship, and obviously mentor is in your name. And you and I have gotten to know each other because we're a great believer in the power of mentorship. But I also, I have felt looking at the field, and particularly in terms of how employers use that word, it can actually be really constraining. It can be this concept of a single individual who's going to sort of solve all your problems, help you accomplish all your goals, stick with you year over year. Despite the fact that we know that not only is the labor market a dynamic and quickly changing sort of ecosystem, but that people may change over time. And if you look at some of the research on how new information opportunities get access, there's actually this concept of the strength of weak ties, that mere acquaintances and one single conversation can itself be transformational. So just curious to hear, you've sort of alluded to this idea that you may jump from person to person as your goals get sort of more crisp or refined. But how do you just think about mentorship as maybe not a single person? And you sort of alluded to that.
Yeah. So a couple of things. So one, it is very valuable in using a word that people at least have some understanding around. And so I don't get too caught up in all the ways people can define it. I think that's the opportunity. You get to say, well, this is our brand of mentorship. Yeah. And if you have enough resources and you build a great product, you can almost redefine sort of what people think. Very hard to do. We'll see what happens in the next 5 years. The second point, though, is when we at Mentor Spaces say mentorship, we're talking about the practice of mentorship. And which is a very important point, that you may play the role of a mentor and you may also play the role of a mentee. And it's all a function of what the topic at hand is, right? And so that allows for this sort of bi-directionality of relationships. It allows for scale. It allows for us to deliver value to everyone, because my view is that, well, everyone's trying to accomplish a goal in something. And everyone has a lived experience that could be helpful to someone else. So our perspective is Mentor Spaces is being this environment where people can engage in the practice of mentorship, recognizing that in some cases you may be the learner, and in other cases you may be the sharer.
It's such an important point. It just echoes some of Clay Christensen's thinking around circumstances versus sort of personalities or personas driving behavior. And I think we forget that sometimes, again, when we sort of anchor on a maybe more traditional, conventional notion of mentorship, but really
Yeah,
helpful.
I completely agree. And that hierarchical nature that people get locked into is what actually constrains opportunity, right? I mean,
Yeah, and has a scarcity mindset to it, I think, too. It
it
limits.
versus an abundance one. Exactly right.
Yeah, great. Super helpful. So I'm curious, you alluded to the fact that kind of on the front end of the user experience within Mentor Spaces, you think about affinity, and affinity, it sounds like along a number of dimensions around both interest and background.
Yeah.
But I think there's actually two big and sometimes like contradictory trends in this space. And when I say this space, I'm thinking of sort of employer-driven mentorship models and even more broadly kind of pipeline development as more
Yeah.
companies focus on diversifying their pipeline. And there's the model of we're going to get really deep around affinity networks on shared traits like race or gender or ethnicity, to offer support and solidarity and sponsorship, because we know that
Right.
similarity breeds connection, and that sponsorship can be really transformational and actually eliminate things like stereotype threat, grow a sense of belonging in a company where you might otherwise not feel that on the basis of your background. The
Right.
other, though, right, is an emphasis on connecting people across lines of difference with mentors from different backgrounds or departments that they might otherwise not have access to. And I'm just curious, like, how do you navigate that? Obviously, you're not someone who I hear falling into either or thinking, but how do you navigate those dynamics as you build a technology tool that could really shepherd people in one or the other direction or potentially both?
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation that you made, and I think it goes back to the thinking about you know, uh, not being sort of too pigeonholed in sort of one approach. And I think so. I have to say it this way: is that look, when we were raising money, investors said, "Well, Chris, how do you measure impact of improving one's confidence?"
Mm.
I said, that's a great question. I said, well, I know because I'm Black that when I see myself reflected in someone else, I feel more comfortable. There's a reason why we all sit at certain tables in college, right, in the cafeteria. And it doesn't mean that I don't value the perspective of others. It doesn't mean that I'm racist or anything else. It just means that this is where I'm most comfortable and where I have my tribe, right? And so if we show 5 mentors to a user and 3 of them are, let's say 1 of them is Black and 4 of them are white, and the mentee is Black, they will almost always select the Black one first for exactly the reasons I just said.
Mm.
If they're on the app for 3 months and another mentor is presented to them and it's the same exact scenario, a different person who's Black and the other 4 are white, they'll choose one who's white.
Hmm.
And that is how you measure the improved confidence. So Christensen's thinking about circumstance is really what I was getting at. Well, the circumstance of someone who lacks confidence is they need some kind of connection that communicates this is safe for you.
Yeah.
And as you build that confidence and as you learn the language of industry or what have you, then you say, oh, I'm selecting this person because I want to understand their approach. I want to understand the value and the differences. So it's definitely not an either or. It is an order of operations that never loses sight of the problem you're trying to solve, right? And if you do that, everybody can feel sort of comfortable with the approach.
And it's also such a more personalized, I don't always like that word, but personalized way to think about mentorship rather than affinity groups as a fixed asset within a company.
Yeah,
or even
I think you're 100% correct. And one of the things that you said that I would want to touch on once for a second, when you get into these concepts like, like employer-driven models or affinity, and we work a lot with employee resource groups, ERGs for short. Yeah. Like I think sometimes the structure confuses or almost eliminates the fact that there's a human being on the other side of this.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes, I think even with a term like diversity and inclusion, and I understand you have to have organizing terms, but sometimes I think you have to go a little bit deeper and say, look, this is the group that's trying to help, our employees win, right, in their careers, because it gets down to like what you're trying to accomplish.
The
Where
function. Yeah.
these big terms sometimes I think muddies the waters and quite honestly triggers people in ways that I'm not always.
Totally. Yeah, well, and I think that's in some ways my fear of some of the employer behaviors in this space on the heels of racial reckoning, whatever you want to dub it, of the past year. Of there's some good intention, but there's a lot of form over function thinking that could I think inadvertently isolate particularly workers and learners of color long term.
Yeah, 100%.
Because relationship isn't seen as the unit of change. So anyways, we'll circle back to that in a second. And I actually think there's such interesting opportunities with technology to be more data driven so that you're focusing on function over form. And I think you guys are headed in that direction. So I want to talk about, you've alluded to confidence, but I want to go one layer deeper in that. And I think your scaffolding or your sort of order of operations point was really helpful here for listeners. But one thing that I think people worry about, particularly when they think about technology solutions, and particularly maybe when we think about just sort of like the downside of big social media companies that have really scaled connection, but not necessarily scaled trust, right? In some ways, conventional social media, right, is like an engine of distrust and disagreement right now in society.
Yeah.
So when we think about tech solutions, it can be actually really cheap to like put connections within reach, but much harder, and I would argue potentially more expensive, to make those connections sort of meaningful, and to have them be a context in which the user, in this case, the learner or the potential employee, is actually building confidence. So how do you think about kind of the context of the mentoring conversations happening in mentor spaces as a chance to develop kind of the skills and mindsets and confidence? Like, can you go one, and obviously this is sort of your IP, so within reason, just sort of share, what's the difference maker?
Well, IP point, and don't get me wrong, it's all about the execution, right? People can know how to do these things, but can they actually do it is a whole other question. But the first thing I'll say is this, is that you said something that really resonated with me about how social media has scaled connection but not trust. And what you described, at least in the way I understand it and received it, is the difference between a network and a community. And community is scaling trust. If I walk outside my neighborhood, I don't know all of my neighbors, but I know I'm not going to get shot, right? If there's trash on the ground, I'm going to pick it up because that's how our community operates. That's how we roll, so to speak. And so to answer your question, if you are very intentional in saying, hey, we're trying to facilitate high quality conversations and we're building a community around the practice of mentorship, you can opt in or you can opt out, right? And so we really keep this community sort of focus, which really helps us to drive our progress. And I also say on the social media point, one thing we learned, and why I think it causes such consternation among people, is that everything that they do is just based off of dopamine, right? It's this sort of fear of missing out, and it compels you to do all of these crazy things. But what if we, as entrepreneurs and innovators and technologists, try to sort of create serotonin? Everyone to have a base of that. And so that's how I think about it, to answer your question. And like, if someone has committed 30 minutes of their time and they had a conversation with someone, and we help that individual who did the sharing understand how they impacted that person in 30 minutes, you feel what we call mentor high, right? And if people can be addicted to that, right, you've completely changed the game. I think a lot of patterns in social media are super valuable because they get down to sort of psychology. And you can't violate psychology when you're creating new products, but you can think about it more holistically and make your goal be something more than just, how many likes I get.
Right. Architect it to something a little more virtuous, maybe. Yeah. Great. Super helpful. So speaking of sort of like kind of engagement, I guess, as part of your bottom line, I'd argue, as you try and scale, I want to talk business models real quick. I wouldn't be
Sure.
a student of Clay Christensen if I didn't. Which is, I think we're seeing a variety of business models getting sort of tried out in this space. Folks obviously are selling into L&D departments. Others are kind of more going the corporate social responsibility funding or subsidy model. A couple people have tried and not necessarily succeeded at kind of a mini income share agreement where if the mentoring experience pays off, you then pay into the mentor of the business.
Yeah.
Anyways, so there's some interesting experiments happening. I'm curious what you're willing to share on sort of your business model, and if you see it evolving moving forward.
Yeah, and those are great observations. The one you didn't mention though is the one that we pursue, which
Yep.
is on the talent attraction, employer branding, and employee retention. And one of the things that's resonated with some of our customers, and we have large customers like T-Mobile and UBS and Omnicom Media and others, they buy into the notion that cultivating relationships through mentorship, which is exactly what's happening, is one of the best ways to build brand trust, build pipelines for the organization. And our approach is leveraging employees who are already activated in the workforce, right?
Yeah.
And so my point is that what resonates with our customers is that their goals are their goals. And their goals typically are, we want to improve our ability to source, hire, and retain underrepresented talent. And literally in my pitch, I'm like, well, the fact that you have it as a goal means that there's a challenge and everything you've done in the past doesn't work. So I would posit that mentorship is the strategy to accomplish the goal. And that's how we can organize our model, which historically has been mentorship is within the walls of a company. Well, that's a constraint.
Right. That's
people who need it will never
Yeah.
have access to it, right? So what's different about us is we're using this concept of mentorship, obviously organized in a different way, to support the talent acquisition and retention motion within an organization. And they're spending billions and billions on it every single year. So that's our approach. Now, there are things that have to be true in order to deliver value to our customers, which is everything I obsess about strategy. And that's part of the real IP underneath everything.
And are they, again, only if you're comfortable sharing, are they asking for sort of ROI data yet? Like, are they looking at conversion rates?
Of course.
Okay.
We just like you can go and engage in some mortgage calculator to understand how much house you can afford, right?
Yeah.
We take that approach. We will pull out our calculator. We will put down to the penny, hey, if we look at these value drivers of sourcing efficiency, employer brand, the increase of rate of promotion, retention, what have you, according to our models, and we recently partnered with SAP SuccessFactors, and they've opened us up to some of their IP on this. We estimate that we can create up to $1.5 million annually of value. And so if I want to give my customers a 10x return and say, okay, well, that's $150,000 annually, and we're going to do a 3-year contract, why would you disagree with that? Right? And this is the movement we're trying to create. Let's take a more data-driven approach because, personally, I used to be a trader, right? So it's a source of competitive advantage. But no, let's make sure that we're delivering on this value, because if you do it, then you get more resources to expand the impact that we want to make. And ultimately, what I love most about what we're doing as a team is that you can do well and do good, but it does require a tremendous amount of work and effort to understand the nuances. And some of that you can read on the blog post or what have you. But, I've been building technology for 10 years. Yeah. Right. I don't know if I got to my 10,000 hours yet.
I think you're probably fast approaching.
Fast approaching it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your candor around that. And especially because I think there's been a trickiness in my own work of kind of trying to talk about dollars and cents alongside this thing of relationships or mentorship that we sort of treat as, well, we shouldn't commodify this thing. And yet the flip side of that is that if you don't have that conversation, there's a lot of rhetoric around relationships and networks and mentorship, but there's not resources dedicated to them. So I think my hope is that, you're the tip of the iceberg of people that are sort of talking about the connection between ROI and investing in relationships.
Yeah, 100%. And I just spoke on sort of ROI in dollars and cents in terms of our customers, but you can look at the same thing in terms of our community
Your
members.
users.
I mean,
Yeah.
what's the value, for example, of a 30-minute or an hour-long conversation with a career coach? Let's say $200 an hour. Well, if our whole business that we're not charging people for is connecting them with people who can help advance their careers, which is the goal that coaches at least say they support, well, then you can calculate down to the penny of the value we're creating to a whole segment of people who don't have access to people who can help them advance their careers, right? And so from a sort of philanthropic model or from an impact investment model, that's our theory of change, right? If you could facilitate conversations between people with lived experiences and those who don't have them, you increase confidence, you increase social capital, and I can calculate down to the penny, right? In a way that's believable. And conservative.
Yeah, excellent. So I just want to close, Chris, with sort of hearing where you're headed as a company. You just closed a round of fundraising, so congrats on that. But what kind of opportunities, as you look over the next year, are you most excited about, given both, I think, dynamics in the space among your customer base, but also just the potential of the platform that you see long term?
In short, I'm looking forward to all the things. I'll be perfectly honest.
Spoken like a true entrepreneur.
But if I was to sort of say it concisely, it's the fact that, I've been building technology for a decade, and it's so rewarding to feel like the market is pulling innovation sort of out of my team and I. We're not pushing stuff on anyone. And that's a really special place to be, because it means that what we do matters as determined by the market, right? And our ability to recruit the best people who have an alternative path, and they don't have to work at said social media companies and, and all the things that they do. Say, they can actually play an active role in moving this conversation forward on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris. We're excited to watch you guys grow in the coming year. Like I said, I'll be linking to your website and a couple articles on your recent developments, and excited to stay connected in this work.
Likewise. Thank you so much again, Julia.